Greetings. In the last mini lecture, I talked about the sophists. And the sophists were realists in the sense that they believed they were explaining what is. So for the sophists, the question is, given our political society as it is, how do you succeed? And so they believed that happiness was the pursuit of honor and wealth and prestige, and that the pursuit of self-interest was natural. And so they were materialists, they were elitists in the sense that they were educating the upper classes of Athenian society. The person that I believe is the most ardent defender of democracy, and I've told you that I will put that uh, as an exam question in the test bank, is Pericles. Pericles, in my mind, emphasizes the notion of what I would call happy versatility. The idea that in a democratic society, greatness can come from any social classes. I believe I told you Abraham Lincoln is my favorite president, and not just because I'm from Kentucky like him. I don't know, probably been to his birthplace 20 times, maybe more. Our high school debate rival, who we used to practice with, and it was a friendly rivalry. They were so much better than us that it was okay, but was in the same county as Lincoln's birthplace. But certainly Lincoln comes from incredibly humble origins, and yet I believe he's the best political leader in terms of a president that we've ever had. Doesn't mean he was perfect. He did a whole variety of things that he shouldn't have done. Uh, but certainly we have seen political leaders come from the most humble origins like Lincoln. We've also seen very good political leaders come from the upper classes. Again, George Washington would be a great example. Very wealthy by the time that he became president, or a Teddy or Franklin Roosevelt, for example. So the idea that in a democratic society, all of us, and I'll come back to this point later, all of us have something to contribute to society. We may not contribute equally to society, but we all have something to offer. And so Pericles stresses this notion of quantity, that we're all equal in terms of our citizenship. We all have something to offer, etc. So I want to move away from the sophists now, and I want to move to Socrates. And here we begin to get closer to political philosophy. We're not there yet because Socrates is really a moral philosopher and not a political philosopher. And yet he is important for us because he is going to be the teacher of Plato. And Plato is a huge opponent of democracy. He's going to be on the opposite side of this battle with Pericles. But certainly your book does a nice job, I think. If we take a look at the notes, Socrates, uh, the son of a stonecutter and a midwife, so I don't know, maybe a middle class upbringing. He did fight as a soldier. He did fight in the Peloponnesian Wars, and he was well acquainted with Pericles. He became very absorbed with philosophy. He totally ignored the advice of the sophists, right, who promoted self-interest. Socrates did the exact opposite. He neglected his private affairs, and the result was he spent a lot of his life in relative poverty. He was a good citizen, and remember, the ancient Greeks believed that participation in politics was essential, that it is citizenship that fully defined human character, and that outside of citizenship, outside of political activity, people were either gods or beasts, and much more likely to be beasts than gods. He did hold political office, but only one time and only for a year. The Council of 500 that I mentioned earlier, where an individual could serve for a year and then they had to sit out for a year, and then they were eligible to come back into politics. Um, he later was sentenced to death by a jury of 500 by 6 votes. So it was very, very close for corrupting the youth in 399 BC. Your authors compare Socrates to Jesus, and certainly there are some interesting parallels that your book points out. Both Socrates and Jesus were excellent teachers. Both Socrates and Jesus threatened the political status quo. Both of them were put on trial for their teachings, and both were unjustifiably put to death for their beliefs. Neither left a written account of their teachings, and what we know about them, we know from their students. So, for example, um, we know about Jesus from Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, etc., Paul. And most of what we know from Socrates is from Plato. And it sometimes is very, very difficult to know where Socrates ends and where Plato begins. Plato attributes a lot of things to Socrates, and it's not always clear whether it's from Socrates or simply whether this is Plato's assumption about Socrates. Notice that as an adult, Socrates was morally, intellectually, and politically against the Athenians. He believed that the sophists, and not just the sophists, but that the democracy that had been devised was bankrupt morally and ethically. And yet, when this political system sentenced him to death, he had an opportunity to escape, and he didn't. And I will admit Socrates is a far better man than me, because if I were unjustifiably accused of a crime, and if the state was going to put me to death, and if in fact I was not guilty, I have to admit to you, I would run and run like hell and get out of there. But Socrates did. We know a few things about him, and there's a picture of Socrates, and you can think about whether or not the description given by others is accurate or not. He was said to be physically unattractive. He had bulging eyes. He was pot-bellied. That part I resemble. I have a little gut myself. Unclean hair, prematurely bald, no shoes. Doesn't paint a very attractive picture of this great man. Second, his teaching style, the Socratic method, is still the number one mode of teaching in law school today in America. If any of you have ever seen the old classic show of law school called The Paper Chase, certainly you see that style of teaching in action. Now, even though I made the claim earlier that Socrates is kind of appalled by the sophists, certainly this notion that truth doesn't matter, ethics doesn't matter, it's about persuasion, it's about getting ahead. Certainly, Socrates disagrees with all of that. But that does not mean that Socrates does not agree with the sophists on some very important points. The first, and probably the most important, is that human beings and human behavior should be the focus of study and analysis and philosophy rather than the study of the universe. That studying the universe is interesting, but we really can't do much about the universe. It's far too great, it's far too expansive. Even if we understood its secrets, we couldn't manipulate it in any way. We couldn't improve it in any way. But we can learn about human behavior, and perhaps through teaching and through knowledge and through discourse, we can improve human behavior. And through knowledge and through truth and through leading the ethical life, we can improve human societies. So we cannot improve the universe, at least in any appreciable way, but if we study human behavior and knowledge and truth and justice and leading the ethical life, cultivating the human soul, we can create a better society. You may want to star the next item because I think this is amongst the most important things in understanding Socrates as a moral philosopher. Again, not as a political philosopher. Plato is going to be our first political scientist. He's going to be our first political theorist. But we're dealing with moral philosophy here that certainly touches on political behavior to the extent that it's human beings that engage in the political process. So in your notes, it says that the sophists and Socrates disagreed on how to find happiness. In the last mini lecture, I told you the sophists believed that people find happiness by pursuing excellence in their human activities. So being a champion in a sport, for example, might bring you happiness. If you're an attorney, winning an important case might bring you happiness. In my case, I had a very tough choice as a young man. Do I go to a research university and publish a lot of articles? And I had just published, co-authored. If any of you want to do a Google search of me, probably what you'll find is an old article in Political Science Quarterly, which is one of the big journals in political science. My mentor and I co-authored an article on alliance pathology in the 1930s, and why didn't the democracy stand up to Hitler when they were more powerful. I enjoyed publishing. It was cool to see my name in print, but there is nothing better for me personally when I feel like in class and face to face, I've given a great lecture, students look happy, we've all had a good time. And certainly when I have those days and I go home, I'm really happy because I feel like I did my job well. And likewise, when I feel like I had a bad day and I wasn't nearly as effective, I'm quite sad. So I do think that the sophists do have a point that people can find happiness. An old saying, and I forgot which sophist said this, and I don't have it in the notes. I used it in my job interview when they said, "What makes you happy?" And I stole a very famous sophist quote that happiness is the pursuit of a task alongside lines of excellence. So certainly from the sophist point of view, happiness is linked to a person's capacity to excel at a particular skill or occupation. My son is now a swim coach. I think the greatest thrill for me was actually watching him many, many years ago. He swam against Michael Phelps, and as you can imagine, Michael Phelps finished first, and I think my son finished like 91st. But the fact that my son had gotten to the point to where he had qualified to swim in an event down in Long Beach against his hero, Michael Phelps, gave him tremendous happiness. It's one of the few times I've ever seen my son happy about losing. And it was a great experience. So even in failing, a noble attempt can give you tremendous exhilaration and happiness. In the next mini lecture, we're going to look at Socrates and we're going to compare his conception of happiness to that of the sophists. Hope you're having a great day.